Good, Yantif. So about a month ago, my son came home from his high school orientation weekend just down the freeway over at Brandeis Bardeen, and Asher was so excited. He was so happy because there'd been a disaster. It was the most engaging and he felt relevant part to his life during that orientation weekend was that they had a day of training for first aid, and all of that was put to test during a disaster scenario. So I thought, oh, this is going to be similar. Our dedicated Mickey Bilski did a fabulous day of training for staff and clergy. We even had role playing for skills that, God willing, we'd never have to use. Your new music director, for your consideration in his role as an uncertain but dithering man as obstacle to good care. He just disappeared into his role. It was really remarkable. And I assume this is what Asher would have experienced, a similar kind of role-playing. But at Brandeis Bardeen, D. Toledo had taken it to an entirely new level. They had smoke. This was an airplane crash. So they had smoke. They had open flame across the field. Teams of students had to make their way through hazards to find real people, not CPR dummies, real people screaming in states of distress or unresponsive with injuries. And they quickly learned how to identify and treat wounds and injuries, including those not visible to the eye. So I wanted to bring something like that here to you this morning. That was my idea. I wanted that scene, but I was told there's fire codes, there's automatic sprinklers, that none of that is something that we'd be able to do for you. So I thought I wanted to just show you, to help you feel the way that sometimes injuries to the soul, what would it be like if those injuries to the soul were as visible to the eye as our physical injuries? I mean, I can from here hear a number of you saying, soul, that's ridiculous. What's that nonsense? But none of you would ever say that if I would ever say a spleen. How ridiculous is a spleen? But even though the physical is obvious, I've never seen my spleen. I mean, I trust that it's there. If I can feel it, it means I'm unhealthy. So good, I can't actually feel it. But I trust that it's there. And there's some of you, I don't think you'd be able to feel your spleen either, but like my doctor who can palpate it, we can actually feel and we can even be touched by each other's souls. It was a few months ago that I was sitting with this young man, and he was describing this feeling of incredible fatigue. I could actually see the heaviness on him across from me, and I used that word heaviness, and he lit up and he said, that's exactly what it is. It was a heaviness. And wisely, he'd gone to his doctor. He'd had some tests, and everything his doctor confirmed was that there's nothing physically wrong with him. Thank God his body was perfectly healthy. But during our conversation, we identified that source, that his physical malaise he was feeling, this was a long untreated injury to his soul. It had never healed, and then a recent loss had reopened it. So all I'm asking is that to some degree we all have the humility to acknowledge that there's things that we may not know, like souls. I have this great dog, Charlie. He's a mutt, he's part beagle, and he can smell things that, thank God, I cannot. He knows things that I can't possibly see with my own nose. So his sense of perception is far beyond mine, and it's obvious to me that I'm limited. I know there are things I can't see, but I can see the effects of them. So thinking of those effects, do you tear up sometimes? Maybe at a movie or at certain music, like Unatana Tokef this morning, or Kol Nidre when we get together next week. Or maybe sometimes you're surprised by those tears coming to your eyes. You can't explain why it is. Do you feel anger, rage, even when you see injustice, when you see a vulnerable child being harmed? Or do you find yourself yearning for something more? You look at your life and you're grateful. You have food in your refrigerator. You got good friends. You're grateful for the health you have. And yet you still yearn. There's got to be something more. And those feelings of being moved by beauty or injustice, that yearning, those feelings, they arise in the soul. Once a combat veteran told me that his soul was dead. Have you ever suffered a trauma or some grief so great or a moral injury that it feels as if you're dead inside? I suspect that many of us have. At times we feel like the walking dead. But the amazing, the miraculous thing is that the soul can be revived. And at any time of the year, of all the days of the year, it's the high holy days that are like that soul CPR. Because we may come in feeling deadened, disconnected, depleted, but we can leave revived, reconnected, renewed. Souls can touch souls and be revived. I realize that high holy days are challenging to connect to for an American, non-Hebrew speaking individual in 2019 Porter Ranch, right? This is the ancient vestige of a temple 2,000 years ago, a central part of which involves blowing through the horn of an animal. Feels very primitive, but maybe it's that single breath. It's something as simple as that our soul needs. It's like the beginning of Torah, that first breath. God formed humans, B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image, from the dust of the ground. Genesis says, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. We're dust, but within us is the breath of God. So maybe you feel what I do during these high holy days when we're breathing and singing all as a single body. Your soul begins to fill again with life and feeling. Or maybe hearing the sound of the shofar, a sound that's not limited by English words, by Hebrew words. It's produced just by breath. Maybe that's the sound that can resuscitate your soul. You hear it, you say, wow, that's been happening for thousands of years, across so many generations. It's happening thousands of times over today, this very day around the world. And those tears come into your eyes and you think, I'm alive. Today and every day, you're connected across space, across time, to this incredible people, this tradition. And you realize that yearning, what you've been missing, is that connection to your soul. Maybe to your own tradition. So think through these high holy days about ways that you, for 5780, how do you want to reconnect to your soul? Maybe it's Torah study with the rabbi, because it's learning that helps you connect. Or mitzvah day on November 3rd. That's where you can choose to connect with your soul, with others, with something greater than yourself. And your soul can revive, it can heal up. But just like any healing, it takes attention, it takes effort. There's this Torah study group that's been meeting at Eleanor and Alex Mizrahi's home for more than 3 years now? 6 years. 6 years weekly they've been meeting. And I regularly notice the wisdom and the integrity and the spiritual resilience of this group of people. And the participants of Helen Rifkin's Musar groups, such good health and growth because they're giving time and attention to their soul. Your soul knows how to find that healing. Tonight before bedtime, just like so many Jews around the world, say the Shema. When you close your eyes, you don't even need to cover. Maybe you're just lying in bed. Close your eyes. Inhale, draw your attention in. And when you breathe that breath, listen. Just like the first human, breathe in and listen. What is your soul saying to you? If injuries to the soul were as evident, as visible as bodily injuries, it'd be so much easier. If you're bleeding, you bet you pay attention. You go and you get care. You take care of that wound. But if the bleeding's internal, maybe you feel off. You haven't yet realized you're hurting. And that day at Brandeis Bardeen, my son was trained to assume unseen injuries, so that way he didn't accidentally harm the person he was trying to help. What if we always greeted each person, assuming an unseen injury? We treated each of them with that kind of care and compassion. Just because we can't see it on their outside, what if we assumed that they were hurting? At the end of that one-day training session, the teens were CPR certified. So what is it today that you need for your High Holy Day Soul CPR certification? It's just Shema, just to remember Shema and listen, to be present and to listen to the person before you. Don't give advice, just give them time and listen. Be a steady, non-anxious presence, which can be very, very hard if you love them. But you got to hang on to your own anxieties and fears. This is about them, and that breath that they take in as they begin to tell you, that can be the very breath that revives their soul, and probably yours too. The other thing to notice is those kids worked as a team. They weren't alone, and neither are you. And Asher said it was interesting that after about 20 minutes into that training scenario, suddenly more smoke started pouring into the cockpit that his team was in. And they felt the urgency. They knew there'd be greater harm if they didn't act right then. We don't have smoke. This is where I'd cue all the smoke to come in, right? We don't have smoke in here. But imagine that urgency, because now is the time to begin. Rosh Hashanah is all about beginnings. It's the anniversary of creation. This day is the birthday, the beginning of the universe. And it's the celebration of God's creation, because Rosh Hashanah is about the beginning of all humanity. The prayers on Rosh Hashanah are universal. They include all people, not just the Jewish people, because we're all part of that giant beating pulse, comes through the universe, courses through each of our own bodies. Rosh Hashanah is about what it is to be human and what it is to be humans who are called to holiness. These are the high holy days. And as Rabbi was saying, what does that word holy mean? Just think of it as something extra, something greater that we humans can do, something that separates us mammals from the other mammals. We can go beyond our usual mammalian needs and wants and ego. We can elevate our words and actions. We can be a mensch. And imagine that world. Imagine a world where people acted not out of mammalian wants and needs and ego, but they were committed to a larger mission. Because that's how the best teams work. I haven't checked in with our president about the Dodgers. But God willing, right. That's how the best teams work. Each player is focused on contributing something greater than themselves, something larger than their own ego or their own stats, and they play their best in order to carry the entire team forward. So imagine that kind of a world. And remember that without every single player on the field, the team has to forfeit. Without the minimum, they forfeit. Each player, each person is integral. Each person matters. You matter. Because on Rosh Hashanah, each of us, each human, Jewish or not, we're called to greatness. Your soul is calling. Shema, listen. On these high holy days, may you hear your own soul. May you have the strength and the courage to begin its renewal. Rededicating yourself to living beyond the limits of your body, this limited thing that houses the infinite soul. And may you always remember that just as the sun rises every morning, the world, your world, is continuously being recreated and renewed. So too, every single morning is for you the opportunity to create yourself and your future anew. Chadesh Yameinu. Chadesh Yameinu, renew our days. And let us say, Amen.